Hi, my name is Ariel Owens, and in this presentation, I will be discussing human rights. What is human rights? Human rights are inherent, universal entitlements that belong to every individual simply by virtue of being human. Human rights are inalienable, they can't be taken away, and are indivisible and interdependent, covering civil, political, economic, social, and cultural freedoms. What comes to mind when you think of human rights? What comes to my mind when I think of human rights is voting rights, women being able to work, freedom of speech, and not being enslaved. To get more in depth about human rights, I will be discussing gender equality, economic and social rights for families, and empowering human rights for revolutionary change. To begin, I will be discussing gender equality and women's rights. In this research article by Rebecca Cook, she discusses how women's rights, gender inequality, and women's health should be protected through the international human rights system. She mentions that the international human rights law hasn't been applied for the disadvantages and injustices that women experience because of their gender. She also mentions that women's rights have advanced. She argues the international human rights law should do more to address the predicament of discrimination and the broader structural injustices that are produced by it. For example, economic inequality and physical violence, human rights, economic, social, political, and civil rights must be treated equally. Also, this article mentions how human rights is incorporated with AI systems. Gender equality is a frontier of human rights, and AI is a new frontier of gender inequality. AI systems are shaping and influencing areas of decision making in our society. Women's equality and empowerment hasn't always been framed in international human rights. At one point, international law didn't focus on women's rights but more on public affairs. She mentions that women weren't ignored, but they were spoken for by men and agencies that catered to men's interests. She wanted the international legal system to recognize the wrongs against women as a human rights violation. The empowerment of women advocated for the rights of women and girls. They mentioned that the women's rights are human rights. Uh, They wanted to take all necessary measures to eliminate discrimination against women and girls, to remove all obstacles to gender equality and the advancement and empowerment of women. She also mentions that AI reinforces gender stereotypes, saying that women working more than men. Gender inequality in AI is identified in context of the problem algorithmic bias. Gender and bias and Gender bias and discrimination in AI occurs in various stages. In algorithm development of process. Inequality, lack of women researchers and developers. It is important to have women in various decision making so that women can help shape decisions towards shared digital future. Secondly, I will be discussing economic and social rights for families. In this discussion, it mentions that Americans make it without support that the rest of the world takes for granted. It states that Americans don't have universal health care, child care, or paid family leave. They state that life is more harder due to floods, droughts, wildfires, and climate changes. They mentioned that not having a sturdy social safety net has left some Americans homeless with no food or health care. And many children are left without child care. Benefits for families provided by the International Human Rights Law are economic and social rights. They mentioned that benefits in a globalized and digitalized world leaves families without being able to be self-sufficient. In order to enhance economic and social justice for families is in the U.S., the International Human Rights Law provides a model. The Human Rights Treaty provides families with economic and social support. Economic rights changes the role of the state by enabling it to ensure that people live free from haunting fear of poverty and insecurity. Everyone has the right to standard of living for adequate health and well-being. Lastly, I will be discussing empowering human rights for revolutionary change. When reading and researching in this article, it states that human rights are meant to control states and states control human rights. In this article, it states that it liberates human rights from paradox. They take third world approaches such as international law. It links Western imperialism and human rights. It has three human rights framework. The first is state-centered, the second is people-centered, and the last one is state-centered. They are aiming for global human rights movement to be bold, imaginative, structural, and attuned to history. They want to empower human rights and right holders to be revolutionarily changed. To sum up this presentation, I have taken into account that International Human Rights Act has a lot to do with human rights, not only just women's rights. Also, I discovered that AI is also tied into human rights and inequality. I have also discovered while doing this research that Americans don't have universal rights to health care and etc. I also discovered in this research that we have a human rights treaty that protects our rights as humans. I have a more broader understanding of human rights than in the beginning and what it means not to just have us being free, having a freedom of speech. I discovered that human rights goes a lot more in depth. I also got my references I got the definition human rights from Wikipedia. I also went to Calhoun's Library Reference Center. Online. Gender Equality, AI and Future of Human Rights by Anna Sue. And then the second one I got from Economic and Social Rights for Families by Barbara Stark. And the third one, I got Empowering Human Rights for Revolutionary Change by Paul Hunt. And that's the last one I got. I also looked on Google for a couple references, but I didn't use any of them. And that's it.